I told myself I would only stay an extra hour. Just long enough to wrap up the quarterly report and clear out my inbox so tomorrow wouldn't crush me the moment I walked in. But 1 hour had turned into 3, and now the office had transformed into something else entirely. The daytime hum was gone. No phones ringing, no printers spitting out endless pages, no chatter drifting across cubicles. Just silence, heavy and absolute, broken only by the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. Even those seemed tired, flickering softly like they resented having to stay awake as much as I did. I stretched in my chair, shoulders aching from hunching over my screen. The glow of my monitor lit the desk in a lonely square of pale blue. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city looked like another world. A scattering of lights, blurred by the faint fog rolling in. Far below, headlights crawled along the streets like fireflies, but none of it felt real from up here. I thought I was alone. I should have been alone. Most people had bolted out right at 5 like prisoners set free. That was the rhythm of the office. Computers shutting down, goodbyes shouted, elevator doors clanging shut, and then quiet. But when I glanced up, I noticed the faint tap of keys across the room. And there he was, my boss. He sat in his corner office, door open just a crack, light spilling out like a secret. His jacket had been shrugged off hours ago, tie loosened, shirt sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He looked less like the man who commanded meetings with sharp certainty and more like someone who didn't quite know how to go home. I blinked, forcing myself back to my spreadsheet. It wasn't strange for him to work late. He had a reputation for it, the kind of dedication that made people whisper admiration and exhaustion in equal measure. But there was something different about realizing we were the only 2 left in the building. I told myself he'd leave soon, that he was probably just finishing a call or signing off on contracts. I stayed focused on my numbers, determined not to think about it. But every few minutes, I'd feel it, that tug in the corner of my awareness, and I'd glance over again. He was still there, still typing, still frowning at whatever glowed back at him from his screen. Time stretched strangely. The clock on the wall ticked toward 9, then past it, and the silence between us became its own presence, thick enough to notice. I shifted in my chair, tapping my pen against the desk just to hear something. Anything. The sound echoed more than I expected, and for a moment I thought about packing up, making some excuse about needing rest. But when I looked over again, I caught him glancing in my direction. It was so quick I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. But then it happened again. His eyes lifting from his monitor, darting toward me, then back down as if nothing had happened. Heat rose in my chest. Why did that feel so different? We'd worked together for over a year. He'd always been firm, professional, the kind of boss you didn't want to disappoint. Conversations were clipped, focused, efficient. There was no reason for me to suddenly feel my pulse quicken just because we were sharing the same silence after hours. And yet, every stolen glance felt like it was cutting across a line that had never been crossed before. The office felt larger and smaller at the same time, too empty, too filled with possibilities. The usual boundary of colleagues and superiors blurred with the low hum of the vending machine and the quiet creak of air ducts cooling for the night. I rubbed at the back of my neck, trying to focus on the glow of my spreadsheets, but my thoughts betrayed me. Why does it feel different being alone with him? Maybe it was the way his tie hung loose instead of perfectly knotted, or how his sleeves rolled up revealed veins along his arms I'd never noticed in the harsh daylight. Maybe it was the fact that, without the noise of the office around us, I could imagine him not just as a boss, but as a man, sitting in his office late at night, just as restless as I was. The thought unsettled me. It was unprofessional, risky, and impossible. And yet, I couldn't stop circling back to it. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling tiles as if the answer was written there. My heart thudded louder than it should have. The night stretched on, long and uncertain, and I realized neither of us was leaving. At some point the quiet started to feel heavy, the kind of quiet that carries a warning. I saved my file twice out of habit, then stood to stretch. The windows showed only our reflections and the city in broken bits of light. I decided to get water, mostly to prove I still knew how to stand. On the way to the kitchen nook, I passed the double glass doors that led to the elevator lobby. Motion sensors should have stirred the lights awake, but the hallway stayed dark. I waved a hand. Nothing. The small green exit sign glowed like a distant lighthouse. I tried the handle. It didn't budge. I pulled harder. The door thudded against its frame and stayed shut. A cold thread unraveled in my stomach. "Everything all right?" His voice came from behind me, deeper in the quiet than during the day. I turned. He had stepped out of his office, jacket draped over one forearm, tie still hanging loose. He looked less like a boss and more like a person stranded at an airport gate. "I think this is locked," I said, trying to sound casual. I tugged again, as if the door might be persuaded by confidence. It wasn't. He tried next. Same result. He frowned, then glanced at the wall clock. After-hours lock. Security must have done the sweep. "There should be someone downstairs, right?" I said. "We can call them." "Usually," he said, "but they switch to on-call after 10 on weeknights." It was 10:14. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. We listened to it ring. It rang a long time. He left a polite message for Mike, explaining the lock and our floor number, then hung up and tried the building management line. Another voicemail. He left another message, polite again, a little more clipped. My palms felt sweaty. The thought formed fast and loud. We're stuck, because I had to chase one more clean spreadsheet and one more inbox zero. "This is my fault," I muttered. "I should have left when everyone else did." He shook his head. "Stop that. We run late sometimes. It happens." I glanced back at the darkness on the other side of the doors. "I didn't think we'd be trapped." "We're not trapped," he said, calm enough that I wanted to borrow his heartbeat. "We're locked in a very safe, climate-controlled box with too many conference rooms and a refrigerator full of questionable yogurt. Worst case, we nap on ergonomic chairs and call it a war story tomorrow." A laugh caught in my throat despite the anxiety. He gave a small, crooked smile in return, then gestured with his chin toward the stairwell. "Let's try the steps." We pushed into the emergency corridor. Concrete, faint paint smell, the echo of our footsteps. He reached for the handle to the stairwell door. It opened with a loud metallic sigh, and we started down. At the landing, he tried the door to the floor below. Locked from the other side. We descended again. Same thing. A sign near the 5th floor landing explained the after-hours policy in tiny letters that sounded reasonable until it applied to us. "Re-entry restricted after 10 p.m. Please use the 1st floor exit." We kept descending. The door to the ground floor should have led to the lobby. Didn't. A heavy crash bar, a red tag, and a notice about alarms and authorized personnel. He tried anyway. The bar moved a fraction and held. Not even the mercy of a fire alarm. He exhaled, then looked at me. "We're not climbing back up all those stairs without a snack." "Is that a professional directive?" I asked, and the joke came out a little breathless. "It is a strongly worded suggestion," he said, and for a moment he seemed more like someone I might have met outside of work, someone who could admit to being hungry, tired, human. Back in the kitchen nook, the vending machine glowed like a tiny casino. He fed it a few coins he produced from somewhere, and the machine hiccuped out 2 bags of chips and a chocolate bar. He handed me the chocolate without asking, as if he had already guessed my choice. "I'll put this on the corporate card," he said. "I'll log it as morale." Perfect. Budget well spent. We ate at the long counter under the soft light, the office stretching quiet and enormous around us. The chips were too salty and the chocolate too sweet. It helped anyway. My pulse slowed. The world shrank back into manageable pieces. He leaned an elbow on the counter. "I left messages. Someone will call back. Tonight. Maybe. Maybe at dawn when the day crew rolls in." Dawn. The word drew a line inside my head. Hours. All those hours. With him. A hush settled between us. Not empty but full. It lived in the way his sleeve brushed the counter, in the scrape of the chip bag, in the way the air felt different this late, cooler, as if the building itself sighed when everyone left. I became aware of the distance between us. It wasn't much. Felt enormous. Cleared my throat. I'm sorry if I kept you late. You didn't, he said. I was avoiding my apartment. I looked at him before I could stop myself. He noticed and gave the simplest shrug, the kind you give when a truth is too large to explain easily. It's quiet there, he added. Too quiet sometimes. I know that quiet, I said, softer than I meant to. He nodded as if we had agreed on something without needing to say it. He checked his phone. No missed calls. All right, he said, practical again. We plan like adults stuck at a middle school lock-in. You take the conference room with the big sofa. I'll take the glass box with the plant I keep killing. We set alarms. We do not attempt to negotiate with the elevator at 2 in the morning. I smiled. You've done this before. Once, he said. Years ago. It was less organized. There was a beanbag chair involved and a terrible cold brew experiment. I tried to imagine him younger, just as driven, falling asleep under a conference table. The picture landed somewhere tender in me, and I turned back to the vending machine to hide it. We made a slow circuit of the floor with our paper cups of water like campers surveying a site. He pointed out the motion lights, the thermostat, the blanket someone kept stashed in the wellness room. The ordinary turned odd under the hour, each familiar thing acquiring a small strangeness. The whiteboards felt like walls of secrets. The copier seemed to breathe. The glass doors reflected us walking side by side. Not boss and employee, just two people trying to make the night pass. We ended up near the windows. The city glittered below, a quiet constellation. He stood with his shoulder almost touching the glass and folded his arms, that same rolled-sleeve forearm I had noticed earlier resting against his chest. You okay? He asked. I think so, I said. I just keep thinking I should be anywhere but here. Would you really rather be anywhere? He asked, and his tone was light, but the question landed heavier than I expected. I hesitated. Honesty pressed forward before caution could shove it back. Not anywhere, just not stuck. We're not stuck, he said again, gentler this time. We're waiting. There's a difference. Waiting. I could live with that. Waiting had an end tucked inside it. He checked his phone once more, then set it face down on the windowsill, as if to prove he could let the night be what it was. We can review your report if you want, he offered. Or we can not talk about work for 1 hour and see if the ceiling caves in. I laughed. Let's risk it. Tell me something you like that would surprise me. It felt like a test only because I wanted to pass. I told him about the old radio show podcasts I played while cleaning on Saturdays, how the stories made my tiny apartment feel like it had neighbors in other decades. He listened with that focused quiet he used in meetings, but softer at the edges. He told me about running at dawn, how he liked being on the street before the city made demands, how the rhythm kept him from unraveling when the days tried to pull him apart. We traded small truths like they were warm things to hold against our hands. Somewhere in there, the panic drained away and left a different ache. Time loosened. The building sighed. The vending machine flicked off and on again as if remembering its own heartbeat. His voice dipped now and then, and the sound of it kept traveling through me even when he stopped speaking. I caught myself leaning a little too far forward, as if closeness were a kind of gravity. That was when the realization returned, not as a cold rush but as a steady pulse. We were here until morning. No shortcut, no clever fix, no elevator miracle. Hours to fill. A boundary to mind. A boundary to notice. Can I really spend the whole night with him? The answer did not arrive as words. It arrived as the way his eyes held mine when the lights at the far end of the floor timed out and the room slipped into a softer dim. As the way he said my name once to check I was still with him in the quiet. As the way my chest rose and fell in time with a breath I could not seem to steady. He picked up his phone. Still no calls. He straightened, businesslike, offering a way to move without acknowledging the shift between us. Let's set up camp, he said. If someone calls, we'll hear it. If not, we'll greet the janitorial crew with our most professional morning faces. Deal, I said. We gathered a blanket, a spare pillow from the wellness room, 2 bottled waters from the bottom of the fridge. We parted at the fork in the hallway, each to our chosen corners, and paused in the soft distance with the kind of awkward wave people give when they do not want the moment to be over yet. "Good night," he said. It sounded almost like a promise. "Good night," I answered, and the office swallowed the words and kept them safe. I tried to convince myself I'd fall asleep, but the office wasn't built for rest. Every time the air system sighed or the vending machine clicked awake, my eyes opened. My conference room couch was stiff, the blanket scratchy, my mind too loud. I must have shifted for the 10th time when a low voice came from the hallway. "You still awake?" I sat up. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed loosely, hair a little rumpled. The man who usually strode into morning meetings in perfect order looked different under the dim office lights. More like someone caught between worlds. "Yeah," I admitted. "Can't seem to switch off." He stepped inside and leaned against the doorframe. "Same. Figured I'd check before I started talking to the ficus in my office." A small laugh escaped me, sharp in the quiet. "If it talks back, that plant deserves a promotion." He smiled at that, just faintly, then gestured toward the sofa. "Mind if I sit?" "Go ahead." The room shrank when he did, though he kept a polite space between us. For a while neither of us spoke. The hum of the building filled the silence, and my nerves buzzed in time with it. He broke it first. "So, tell me something not in your performance reviews." I blinked. "Like what?" "Anything. Hobby, secret skill, what you actually wanted to be when you grew up. Consider it an icebreaker, lock-in edition." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to keep the distance, to stay inside the neat little box of boss and employee. But another part, the restless, lonely part that had been gnawing at me all evening, wanted to let the line blur. "I thought I'd be a teacher," I said finally. "History, maybe." I liked the idea of helping people make sense of stories. But my dad pushed me toward something more stable. "And you ended up here." "Yeah. Numbers instead of narratives." I shrugged. "It's fine. Pays the rent. But sometimes I feel like I'm just filling boxes no one looks at." He was quiet for a moment, studying me in that way that usually made me nervous during presentations. But now it felt different, softer, almost curious. "Funny," he said at last. "I always thought you seemed steady, like you had a plan. You never looked lost in meetings." "That's because I rehearse everything," I admitted with a weak laugh. "If I didn't, I'd probably trip over my words. Or my feet." That earned a real chuckle from him, low and warm. "I get that," he said. "I rehearse too. Half the time I'm bluffing." I turned toward him, surprised. "You? You always seem like you know exactly what you're doing." "Appearances." He leaned back, stretching his arms along the top of the sofa, voice dipping quieter. "Truth is, I stay late most nights because it's easier than going home. Apartment's empty. No one waiting. Work fills the quiet." The words landed heavy, like something he hadn't meant to say out loud. I studied the lines of his face, the tired edge in his eyes I hadn't noticed before. He wasn't just a boss burning the midnight oil. He was a man filling a silence he didn't want to face. I nodded slowly. "I know that quiet too." For the first time, the barrier between us cracked. Authority, titles, the careful choreography of professionalism, it all slid to the side. For a moment, it was just two people awake when they should have been asleep, confessing small truths to make the night bearable. "I worry," I said before I could stop myself, "that I'm wasting time. That I'll wake up one day and realize all I did was shuffle numbers around until the lights went out." His gaze caught mine, steady and unflinching. "You're not wasting time. You're building something, even if it doesn't feel like it yet." The words were meant to reassure, but the way he said them, deliberate, quiet, looking right into me, made my chest tighten. Silence fell again, but not the uneasy kind. More like the hush after a storm when the air feels cleaner. Then he smirked. "Although I can't defend the yogurt in the fridge. That's definitely a waste of time." The unexpected humor made me laugh harder than I should have, shoulders shaking, hand pressed to my face. He joined in, and the sound echoed through the empty floor like something alive. For a few seconds, the office felt almost warm. When the laughter faded, we were still looking at each other. Too long. Much too long. My breath caught. His smile softened, eyes lingering on mine in a way that said the moment had shifted again, even if neither of us dared name it. I swallowed, trying to break the spell. So, what did you want to be when you grew up? He leaned closer, just slightly, as if drawn by the question itself. Happy, he said simply. The word hung between us, quiet and raw, and I realized, with a jolt that made my pulse jump, that maybe he wasn't the only one searching for it in the wrong places. The office lights flickered just after midnight. A low hum cut off, returned, then half the floor went dark. I froze. The glow from our corner remained, but the far stretch of cubicles disappeared into shadow, like the building itself had decided to close its eyes. Great, I muttered. Exactly what we needed. He tilted his head toward the darkened rows. Motion sensors. Half the floor powers down after midnight. No one thought to plan for, well, us. His tone was calm, but the dimness shifted something inside me. The shadows felt heavier, the quiet thicker. I could hear my own pulse in the stillness. We stayed where we were for a long moment, letting the hush settle. Then he sighed and leaned back against the conference table, one hand braced behind him. In the dim glow, he looked less like the man who barked orders in meetings and more like someone caught mid-confession, as if the dark had loosened something he usually kept locked tight. I wasn't lying earlier, he said. I don't go home because it's quiet, but that's only half of it. I turned to him, waiting. He rubbed a hand over his face, eyes cast down. I got divorced 2 years ago. Papers were neat, clean, everything signed without much of a fight. But the silence afterward wasn't neat at all. Work filled the space better than staring at a ceiling. The words were simple, but the weight of them hung heavy between us. I didn't know, I said softly. Not exactly something you put in an office memo, he replied with a dry smile. At first, I told myself I liked the freedom. More time, no expectations. But after a while, it starts to feel like no one sees you. Not really. Not outside of what you can deliver on a spreadsheet or a balance sheet. His voice dipped low on that last part, and something in me cracked open. Because I knew that feeling. The ache of being invisible in a world that only asked for output, not presence. I swallowed hard. I think I always saw you. More than just the boss. The words slipped out before I could stop them. My throat burned with the heat of saying too much, but I didn't take them back. His head lifted, eyes finding mine in the dim light. You did. I nodded, breath unsteady. I admired the way you carried yourself, how you filled a room. It wasn't just respect. It was... My voice faltered, the last word catching like it wanted to betray me. More than that. A heavy pause followed. The kind where the air grows so thick you can almost touch it, where every second stretches and dares you to speak again. I could see his chest rise and fall, the faint furrow in his brow as if he was weighing a dozen things at once. I wondered if I had destroyed something, the safety of professionalism, the fragile trust of this night. But he didn't look away. He shifted, pushing off the table, moving just close enough that the distance between us shrank to a few feet. Not too close, not yet. Just near enough that I could feel the pull, the unspoken gravity of him. You know, he said, voice low. I thought I was the only one who noticed anything tonight. The honesty in his tone made my skin prickle. I leaned back against the desk across from him, mirroring his stance without thinking. Our voices dropped lower, softer, as if the shadows demanded secrecy. You weren't, I admitted. My heart thudded hard enough to make me lightheaded. Every time I looked up, you were already looking. A corner of his mouth lifted, almost a smile, almost not. You caught that, huh? I did, I whispered. But another voice cut through all the fear. What if this is real? What if he feels it too? I glanced up at him, and he was already watching me. His eyes flicked to where our hands rested side by side, then back to mine. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The question was there, suspended between us. My breath caught. We shouldn't, I whispered, but even as I said it, my fingers curled ever so slightly toward his. No, he said softly. We shouldn't. And still, neither of us moved. The moment stretched, unbearable in its intensity, until something inside me snapped. I turned, closing the space. Our lips met, hesitant, almost startled, like we'd both stumbled into it by accident. His mouth was warm, tentative, testing. My chest tightened, and for a heartbeat I froze. Then the dam broke. The kiss deepened, slow at first, then hungrier, needs spilling out of both of us after too many hours of silence and too many months of loneliness. His hand lifted, cupping the side of my jaw, thumb grazing my cheek like he was afraid I'd vanish if he pressed too hard. I leaned into it, clutching his shirt, anchoring myself to the reality of it. The world narrowed to the press of his lips, the faint taste of coffee still clinging to his breath, the rush of blood in my ears drowning out every rational thought. For a moment, nothing existed but him and the electric charge sparking through me. But then he pulled back, breathing hard, forehead resting against mine. His hand still cradled my face, but he didn't push for more. He just stayed there, suspended between longing and restraint. "We can't," he murmured, voice rough with conflict. "I know," I whispered, though my fingers still clutched his shirt as if letting go would undo everything. He closed his eyes, jaw tight. If we cross that line too far, then we can't go back," I finished for him. He nodded, just barely, eyes still shut. The silence stretched again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was thick with everything we weren't saying. His eyes lingered on mine, longer than they should have. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, afraid that any sudden motion would shatter the fragile thread connecting us. The space between us felt alive. Every inch mattered, the few feet across the desks, the invisible line neither of us had stepped over. "Maybe I said too much," I murmured, trying to retreat behind caution. "Or maybe not enough," he countered, his voice so low it almost wasn't sound at all. The words sent a shiver through me. He leaned forward slightly, forearms braced on his desk, bringing his face closer to mine. His eyes caught the dim light, reflecting something I couldn't name. Longing, fear, maybe both. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. We just stood there, leaning against opposite desks like two magnets testing the space between them, each second pulling us closer. The air seemed to hum with the unspoken. My hand brushed the edge of the desk, fingers curling tight to keep from reaching across the gap. His jaw flexed, as if he was fighting the same impulse. The office had never felt smaller or larger all at once. The silence pressed in so thick I could almost hear my own heartbeat echo off the glass walls. He hadn't moved back. Neither had I. It felt like we were both waiting for something to tip. He shifted slightly, leaning on the desk beside me, and in that small adjustment his hand brushed mine. Just the faintest contact, skin against skin, a fraction of a second. But neither of us pulled away. The touch lingered, light as air yet heavy with meaning. My pulse jumped. My body tensed, but not from wanting to recoil. It was the opposite, the terrifying urge to lean into it. 1,000 thoughts collided in my head. This is my boss. This is wrong. What if tomorrow he pretends it never happened? What if I'm just another way to pass a lonely night? I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. My mind replayed every second of the kiss. The warmth, the hesitation, the way his hand had steadied me like I was something fragile and precious. I lay on the stiff conference room sofa, staring at the ceiling tiles, equal parts terrified of what dawn would bring and electrified by the possibility that it might not be the end, but the beginning. Thrilled and terrified, in equal measure. The first light of morning found me wide awake. I hadn't slept more than a handful of minutes. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the ghost of his lips on mine, the weight of his hand against my jaw. I'd replayed it until my body hummed with equal parts shame and thrill. When the pale dawn began filtering through the high office windows, I sat up from the stiff sofa. The city below was already stirring. Headlights streaking down avenues, buildings glowing with fresh starts. A new day was here, but it didn't feel clean. It felt raw, as if something fragile and irreversible had cracked open between us. I heard movement down the hall. He emerged a moment later, jacket slung over his shoulder, shirt wrinkled from the night. His hair was slightly mussed, like he hadn't even tried to tame it. He looked less like a boss and more like someone still caught in the weight of last night. "Morning?" I said softly, though my voice betrayed my nerves. He gave a small nod. "Morning." For a long moment, that was all. We stood in the faint gold light, silence hanging heavy. The world outside was moving on like nothing had changed, and part of me wanted to pretend the same. To file last night away as a slip, a strange moment in the dark that daylight erased. Maybe that's what he wanted too. Maybe that's what we should want. I swallowed. We should probably forget what happened. The words tasted like ash even as I said them. It was late. We were tired. People say things, do things when... I don't want to forget. His voice cut across mine, quiet but sure. I froze. "What?" He stepped closer, his eyes holding mine. "I don't regret it. Not the words. Not the kiss." His jaw tightened, as if he'd been rehearsing the honesty all night and only now dared let it out. "Do you?" I opened my mouth, but no excuse came. No careful lie to make it easy. The truth pressed up before I could smother it. "No," I whispered. "I don't regret it." My chest ached with the confession. But what happens now? That was the question that had gnawed at me for hours. This wasn't just about one kiss in the dark. It was about boundaries, risks, what it would mean for tomorrow, next week, every day after. He let out a slow breath, rubbing the back of his neck. "That's what I've been asking myself since you walked out of that conference room." His mouth curved into a faint, tired smile. "I thought it was just loneliness, just two people trapped overnight. But it wasn't. Not for me." Something broke loose in my chest. Relief, fear, longing, all at once. "It wasn't for me either," I admitted, my voice unsteady. "I felt it for a while. I just never thought you would." "Neither did I," he said. He moved closer still, not touching me, but near enough that I could feel the warmth radiating between us. "That's the problem. It would have been easier if it was just a mistake. Easier if I could walk into the office Monday and pretend nothing happened. And you can't." His eyes held mine, steady, searching. "Not anymore." The honesty in his tone stripped away the last of my defenses. The authority, the professionalism, the safe distance of titles. All of it had collapsed overnight, and now we were standing in the ruins, exposed but real. I thought of the months I'd spent stealing glances at him in meetings, of the late nights where I'd imagined what it would be like to know him beyond his sharp voice and pressed suits. And now, here we were. The risk wasn't abstract anymore. It was standing inches away, asking me if I wanted to reach for it. I nodded slowly. "Then maybe we don't pretend." For a moment, neither of us breathed. The air between us felt alive, trembling with the weight of that choice. Finally, he let out a soft laugh, shaky at the edges. "You make it sound simple." "It's not," I said, matching his small smile. "But nothing worth having ever is." His eyes softened then, the hard edges of his expression giving way to something almost tender. He reached out, just barely brushing his fingertips against mine. Not the hungry need of last night, but something steadier, almost reverent. "This could cost us," he said quietly. "Or it could save us," I replied. The light had grown stronger now, painting the floor in warm streaks. The city was fully awake, and so were we. No shadows to hide in, no excuses left. I didn't know what the future looked like. I didn't know if we'd stumble, if we'd have to fight for this against every expectation. But for the first time in a long while, the thought didn't terrify me. It thrilled me, because last night wasn't just loneliness. It wasn't just circumstance. It was connection. Real, raw, undeniable. And standing in the morning light, I realized it was worth the risk. It's strange how quickly something impossible can begin to feel ordinary. Weeks have passed since that night, and yet, every time I think about it, I'm still caught between disbelief and gratitude. The version of me who thought he was trapped in an empty office with his boss would never have imagined this. Quiet mornings with 2 mugs of coffee, evenings that don't feel so lonely, and laughter that spills out in places I never expected. We didn't tell anyone. Not at first. It was ours, fragile and secret, something we held between us like a flame cupped against the wind. We didn't need the office to know. We just needed time and each other. Saturday mornings became our ritual. He'd run early, as always, but now he'd come back with coffee in hand, dropping one in front of me with a teasing, "Extra sugar, because I know you can't handle it black." I'd roll my eyes, pretending to be annoyed, but the truth was I liked how he remembered, how he noticed. We started walking together in the evenings too, through the city streets lit by storefronts and neon. Sometimes we talked about work, impossible clients, ridiculous deadlines, but mostly we didn't. We talked about everything else. Books I'd never guessed he read. Music he hadn't listened to since college. The kind of childhood stories you only tell when you trust someone not to laugh too hard. One night, while crossing the park, I told him about the history teacher I'd almost become, how I still sometimes imagined classrooms full of curious eyes. He listened like it mattered, like it wasn't just some half-buried dream. Then he nudged me and said, "Maybe that's why you're good at what you do. You don't just see numbers. You see the story behind them." I don't think he realized how much that meant, but I carried it with me for days. It wasn't perfect. We had to navigate the line between work and whatever this was becoming. At the office, we kept things professional. No one watching us in meetings would suspect anything. But sometimes, I'd catch his eyes on me during a presentation, and the faintest curve of a smile would tug at his mouth. My stomach would flip, heat rising to my face, and I'd stumble over my words just enough to remind myself that secrecy didn't mean silence. And yet, I didn't mind the risk. For the first time in years, I felt awake. The night we got locked in had felt like a trap. Metal doors, empty hallways, the kind of stillness that makes you restless. But looking back now, it feels more like fate. That closed door forced us to stop hiding behind routine, to admit what had been building quietly in the spaces between. I used to think my life was defined by spreadsheets, deadlines, and late nights that blurred together. Now, those nights are just the backdrop to something brighter. The unexpected, steady presence of him. A few weeks ago, we were sitting on his couch, watching a terrible movie neither of us cared about. He reached for the popcorn bowl and our hands brushed. Not by accident this time. He didn't move away. Neither did I. And then he looked at me with the same eyes he had that night in the office, steady and searching. Only this time there was no hesitation. We kissed again, and it wasn't cautious or afraid. It was sure. Now, every time we share a coffee or a quiet joke, every time his hand finds mine without fear, I realize just how far we've come from that night. What I once thought was just loneliness revealed itself to be something deeper. Connection, belonging, maybe even the beginning of love. At work, of course, we still play our roles. He's the boss, I'm the employee. The office hums as always. But there are little moments no one else sees. Like this morning. I was heading to the copier when he passed by, stack of files in hand. No one was watching, but he still kept his tone brisk, professional. Yet as he moved past me, he caught my eye and winked. Quick, subtle, but unmistakable. Heat rushed up my neck. I fumbled with the papers in my hands, nearly dropping them. He smirked, the picture of composure, and kept walking like nothing had happened. I knew I was blushing. I also knew he knew. And for the first time, I didn't care. Because that night hadn't trapped me in a room with my boss. It had opened a door I didn't even know was there. I thought that night would lock me in. But really, it set me free. What would you do if you were locked in the office overnight with your boss? Panic? Keep it professional? Or let something unexpected happen?